Chapter 1, The Breaking Point. I stared at the text message on my phone for the 15th time, my hands trembling as I read the 7 words that had shattered my world. There's something I need to tell you. My fiancé David had sent it 3 hours ago, followed by nothing but silence. Not a call, not another text, nothing. Those 7 words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I couldn't see but knew was burning everything I thought I knew about my life. The worst part wasn't what he'd said, it was what he hadn't said. A complete lie would have been devastating but clear. I don't love you anymore would have broken my heart but given me direction. I've been cheating would have destroyed me but provided closure. Instead, I was left with a fragment, a half-truth that poisoned every thought without offering any resolution. I sat in my Denver apartment, watching the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, feeling like my mind was unraveling thread by thread. What did he need to tell me? Was it about our wedding in 6 weeks? Another woman? A terminal illness? Financial ruin? The not knowing was worse than any truth could have been. This wasn't the first time half-truths had tormented me. At 28, I'd become an expert at living in the spaces between what people said and what they meant, constantly trying to piece together incomplete information like a detective working a case with missing evidence. My mother had been the first teacher in this painful curriculum. Throughout my childhood, she'd mastered the art of partial disclosure. "Daddy's working late again," she'd say, when the truth was he was having an affair. "We're moving because of Dad's job," when the reality was we were fleeing creditors. "I'm just tired," when she was battling severe depression. Each half-truth had been technically accurate but emotionally devastating. I'd spent my teenage years second-guessing everything, analyzing every pause, every word choice, every facial expression for clues about what wasn't being said. The constant detective work had exhausted me and left me with an anxiety disorder that made trusting anyone feel impossible. In college, I'd briefly dated someone who lied constantly and completely, about his background, his family, even his real name. Discovering the truth had been shocking, but it had also been liberating. The lies were so comprehensive that once I uncovered them, I knew exactly where I stood. There was no ambiguity, no second-guessing. I could be angry, grieve, and move on. But David's half-truths were different. They were surgical strikes that left me bleeding internally while appearing fine on the surface. I went out with the guys when he'd actually gone to dinner with his ex-girlfriend and 3 other people. Work was stressful today when his real stress came from his father's criticism of our relationship. I'm fine when he was clearly struggling with something he wouldn't share. Each partial truth felt like a small betrayal that accumulated over time, creating a foundation of mistrust that I couldn't quite name or address. How do you confront someone for telling you the truth? How do you explain that it's not what they said but what they didn't say that's destroying your peace of mind? As darkness fell over Denver, I realized I was drowning in uncertainty, and I didn't know how to swim to shore. Chapter 2, The Descent. The next 3 weeks became a masterclass in psychological torture. David finally called 2 days later and delivered the half-truth that would haunt me. "I've been having some doubts about us, but I still love you." That sentence contained just enough truth to keep me holding on and just enough ambiguity to drive me insane. What kind of doubts? About our compatibility? Our future? The wedding? His feelings? "But I still love you" felt like a life preserver thrown to someone drowning, except it was made of lead. I found myself obsessively analyzing every interaction we'd had over the past year, for clues I'd missed. Had he been planning to tell me something different? Was he protecting my feelings or his own? The not knowing consumed me in ways that a clear "I want to break up" never could have. Friends tried to help, but their advice only highlighted how trapped I was. "At least he's being honest," they'd say, not understanding that his honesty felt more manipulative than any lie. "Just ask him what he means," they'd suggest, not realizing that I'd tried and received only more fragments in response. The half-truths spread to other areas of my life like an infection. At work, my boss mentioned there might be some changes coming but provided no details about what those changes might mean for my position. My landlord said there were some issues with the building that might affect my lease but wouldn't elaborate. Even my doctor, after running some tests, said my results showed a few things we should keep an eye on without explaining what those things were or why they mattered. I began to feel like I was living in a world where everyone spoke in code, where the most important information was always hidden between the lines. The constant uncertainty was exhausting. I couldn't make decisions because I didn't have enough information, but I couldn't get more information because people seemed committed to speaking in fragments. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a romantic dinner with David. I'd spent weeks trying to decode his doubts comment, and finally worked up the courage to ask for clarity. When you said you had doubts about us, I began carefully, I need to understand what that means for our future. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his napkin. I don't know, Mia. It's complicated. There are just some things. I mean, my family has concerns, and I've been thinking about whether we're really compatible long-term, but I don't want to hurt you by getting into all the details. Another half-truth. Another fragment designed to protect his comfort while destroying my peace of mind. I felt something snap inside me. David, I said, my voice shaking, I need you to understand something. When you tell me half of the truth, it hurts more than if you told me nothing at all. Your complications and concerns are eating me alive. I'd rather you lie to me completely than torture me with pieces. He looked shocked. But I'm trying to be honest without being cruel. Cruel would be kind compared to this, I replied. Cruel would give me something to react to. This is like being slowly poisoned. That night, I called my best friend Sarah in tears. I think I'm going crazy, I sobbed. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I don't even know if there is another shoe or what foot it's on. Mia, she said gently, you need to talk to someone who understands this kind of thing. My cousin Carl is a lawyer in Florida, and he deals with people who've been through psychological manipulation all the time. Maybe he could help you make sense of what you're experiencing. I was desperate enough to try anything. Chapter 3, The Encounter. Carl Martinez was nothing like I'd expected. When I called him, I'd anticipated legal jargon and analytical distance. Instead, I found a warm, insightful man who immediately understood my pain. Mia, he said during our first video call, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years in courtrooms, what you're describing is a recognized form of psychological distress. In legal settings, we see the difference between outright perjury and misleading testimony all the time. And you know what? Juries hate misleading testimony more than flat-out lies. He leaned back in his chair, his Miami office visible behind him. Let me tell you about a case I handled last year. A woman named Patricia discovered her husband had been telling her work was busy for 6 months when he was actually taking night classes to become a pilot, his dream since childhood. When she found out, she wasn't angry about the classes. She was devastated by the half-truths that made her feel like she was losing her mind. Carl explained that I was experiencing what psychologists call cognitive dissonance amplified by partial information, the mental stress that occurs when you know something is incomplete but can't access the missing pieces. Think about it this way, he continued. If someone tells you a complete lie, your brain can categorize it as false once you discover the truth. But a half-truth occupies this gray space where your mind can't rest. It's true enough that you can't dismiss it, but incomplete enough that you can't understand it. He shared research from Dr. Susan Forward, a therapist who studied emotional manipulation. Her studies showed that people who experienced chronic half-truths developed higher levels of anxiety and lower levels of trust than those who experienced outright deception. The reason is simple, Carl explained. A complete lie is an attack you can defend against. A half-truth is a puzzle you're forced to solve without all the pieces. It keeps your mind constantly engaged in trying to fill in the blanks, which is exhausting and ultimately futile. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I wasn't crazy. There was a reason this felt worse than if David had simply lied to me. But here's what's even more important, Carl continued. Half-truths don't just hurt the receiver, they corrupt the speaker. When people get comfortable with partial disclosure, they lose touch with the integrity that comes from complete honesty. He told me about his work with corporate whistleblowers, people who'd watched companies destroy themselves through cultures of half-truths. I've seen billion-dollar organizations collapse not because anyone told outright lies, but because everyone got comfortable with telling partial truths. Nobody had the complete picture, and eventually, nobody could make good decisions. Carl introduced me to what he called the 3 levels of truth communication. Level 1. Complete lies, fully false information that can be clearly identified and rejected once discovered. Level 2. Half-truths, partially accurate information that creates confusion and prevents clear decision-making. Level 3. Complete truth with context, full information delivered with appropriate timing and emotional intelligence. The key insight, Carl explained, is that sometimes level 1 is actually kinder than level 2. If you can't offer level 3, sometimes it's better to say nothing at all than to torture someone with fragments. But how do I deal with David? I asked. How do I get him to understand what his half-truths are doing to me? Carl smiled. That's where we start teaching you to demand complete truth or complete silence. No more living in the gray zones. Chapter 4, The Ascent. Armed with Carl's framework, I returned to Denver with a new resolve. I wasn't going to live in the space between truth and lies anymore. I was going to demand clarity, even if it meant losing relationships that couldn't handle complete honesty. The first test came with David. I called him and asked for a meeting, but this time I came prepared with Carl's principles. David, I said, sitting across from him at our favorite coffee shop, I need to tell you something important. I can't live with half-truths anymore. They're destroying my mental health and our relationship. I explained what I'd learned from Carl about the psychological impact of partial disclosure. When you tell me you have doubts without explaining what they are, you're not protecting me, you're torturing me. When you say your family has concerns without telling me what they are, you're making me live in a state of constant anxiety. David looked uncomfortable but intrigued. I thought I was being kind by not giving you all the harsh details. Kindness would be giving me the information I need to make good decisions about my life, I replied. I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a complete answer. Do you want to marry me 6 weeks from now, yes or no? He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, no. I love you, but I'm not ready for marriage, and I'm afraid I may never be. My family thinks we're too different, and if I'm honest, sometimes I think they're right. The words hit like a punch to the gut, but alongside the pain, I felt something unexpected, relief. Finally, I had clarity. Finally, I could stop trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Thank you, I said, tears streaming down my face. That hurt, but it was the first honest thing you've said to me in months. The conversation was devastating, but it was also liberating. Within an hour, we'd canceled the wedding, divided our shared belongings, and agreed on a timeline for me to move out. It was painful, but it was clean. I applied the same principle to other areas of my life. When my boss mentioned changes coming, I scheduled a meeting and asked directly about my job security. It turned out the company was restructuring, and my position was actually being expanded with a promotion. The changes were positive, but her vague communication had caused weeks of unnecessary stress. With my landlord, I demanded specifics about the building issues. It turned out to be a minor plumbing upgrade that would inconvenience me for 2 days. The way he presented it, I'd been preparing to move. The most difficult conversation was with my mother. I called her and said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. I've realized that the way we communicate in our family has caused me a lot of pain over the years." I explained Carl's framework and how half-truths had affected my ability to trust and make decisions. I know you thought you were protecting me when I was younger, but the partial information was actually more harmful than the full truth would have been. My mother was quiet. For a long time. I never realized, she finally said. I thought if I told you everything, it would burden you. The not knowing was the burden, I replied. The half-truths made me feel like I was living in a world where I couldn't trust my own perceptions. To my surprise, my mother began opening up about her own childhood, how her parents had communicated in the same fragments and half-truths. We were both victims of a generational pattern of incomplete honesty that had been passed down like a family heirloom no one wanted to claim. But the real breakthrough came when I started applying Carl's principles to my own communication. I realized I'd been guilty of half-truths too, telling people I was fine when I was struggling, saying work was okay when I was actually passionate about a project, claiming I was not sure about things when I had strong opinions. I began practicing what Carl called truthful courage, the willingness to speak completely and honestly, even when it felt vulnerable. When friends asked how I was doing post-breakup, instead of saying I'm okay, I said, I'm heartbroken but relieved to finally have clarity. When coworkers asked about my weekend plans, instead of being vague, I shared specific activities I was excited about. The response was remarkable. People began sharing more openly with me. Conversations became deeper and more meaningful. I realized that my own half-truths had been creating the same confusion in others that I'd experienced from David and my family. Chapter 5: The Integration. 6 months after my conversation with Carl, I found myself in a completely different life. I'd moved to a new apartment, gotten a promotion at work, and begun dating someone who valued complete honesty as much as I did. But more importantly, I'd become a person who understood the difference between truth that heals and truth that harms, and how to navigate that difference responsibly. Carl had become more than a mentor, he'd become a friend who helped me understand that integrity isn't just about honesty, it's about the wisdom to know how and when to share truth in ways that serve rather than harm. Mia, he said during one of our regular check-ins, you've learned something that most people never figure out. The goal isn't just to be honest, it's to be responsibly honest. Sometimes that means waiting until you can provide context. Sometimes it means saying nothing until you can say everything. But it never means torturing someone with fragments. He shared a recent case where he'd helped a couple navigate a crisis where the husband had been laid off but was afraid to tell his wife because she was pregnant. The husband thought he was protecting her by saying work was stressful instead of admitting he'd lost his job. But his half-truths created more anxiety than the truth would have. Carl had helped them understand that complete honesty, delivered with love and a plan, would have brought them together instead of driving them apart. That's the key, Carl explained. Truth without context is often cruelty. But context without truth is manipulation. The art is in finding the right time and way to deliver complete truth with complete love. I'd started applying this principle in my new relationship with Marcus, a teacher I'd met through mutual friends. When he asked about my past relationships, I didn't just say it didn't work out, I explained what I'd learned about communication and why complete honesty was important to me. When I was struggling with anxiety about my father's health, instead of just saying I was worried about family stuff, I shared the specific concerns and asked for support. Marcus responded with the kind of understanding and care that only comes when people feel trusted with the whole truth. But the most profound change was in my relationship with my mother. Our monthly calls had transformed from surface-level check-ins to deep conversations about life, family, and the lessons we'd both learned about communication. You know what I'm most grateful for, she said during our last conversation. Finally feeling like I know my daughter. All those years of protecting you from harsh realities meant I never got to see how strong and wise you actually are. I'd also started volunteering with a local support group for people recovering from emotionally manipulative relationships. Carl had connected me with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a therapist who specialized in helping people recognize and heal from psychological manipulation. What you experienced with half-truths is incredibly common, Dr. Walsh told me. And your recovery process, learning to demand complete truth or complete silence, is exactly what we teach people in therapy. She shared research from the University of Toronto showing that people who learned to identify and address partial disclosure had significantly better mental health outcomes than those who continued to accept fragments as acceptable communication. The beautiful thing about your story, Dr. Walsh continued, is that you've learned to be a truth teller yourself. You're modeling for others what complete honesty with compassion looks like. 1 year after my breakup with David, I received an unexpected text from him. I've been thinking about our last conversation, and I wanted to thank you for teaching me about honest communication. It's changed how I approach all my relationships. He'd started therapy and was learning to recognize his own patterns of partial disclosure. "I never realized how cruel my kindness was," he wrote. "I thought I was protecting people, but I was actually torturing them." I smiled as I read his message, feeling grateful that our painful experience had led to growth for both of us. That evening, I called Carl to share the update. "You know what's interesting?" I told him. "David's complete lie about being ready for marriage would have hurt initially but given me clarity. His half-truths about having doubts tortured me for months." "You were right, sometimes a complete lie is kinder than a partial truth. But here's what you've learned that goes beyond that," Carl replied. "The goal isn't to choose between lies and half-truths. It's to choose complete truth delivered with wisdom and compassion. That's what transforms relationships and builds real trust." Today, when people ask me about my relationship philosophy, I tell them what Carl taught me: truth must not only be spoken, it must be understood. Real strength lies in saying the right thing, at the right time, in the right way, even if that means delaying the truth until it can heal instead of harm. I've learned that integrity isn't just about honesty, it's about the responsibility for how truth is carried and shared. Sometimes that means complete transparency. Sometimes it means thoughtful silence until you can provide context. But it never means torturing someone with fragments of reality that they can't understand or act upon. The woman who once lived in constant anxiety, trying to decode half-truths and fill in blanks with her imagination, has become someone who values clarity above comfort and truth above convenience. I've learned that while complete lies can be forgiven, half-truths often leave permanent cracks in trust because they feel manipulative rather than protective. Most importantly, I've discovered that the people who truly love you would rather face a difficult truth than live with a comfortable half-truth. Real relationships are built on the foundation of complete honesty delivered with complete love, nothing more, and certainly nothing less. In the end, Carl helped me understand that why a complete lie hurts less than a half-truth isn't because lies are good, but because half-truths are a special kind of cruelty that keeps people trapped between reality and imagination. The solution isn't to become comfortable with lies, it's to become committed to truth that heals rather than truth that harms.